if you guys follow this channel or you follow anything to do with pop culture, we have a lot of criticisms of Disney, whether it's the movies, the television shows, Bob Iger. All of that stuff is very, very relevant. Well, it's making its way into mainstream politics, obviously. And James O'Keefe, of course, is an investigative journalist, and he is exposing the anti-white agenda going on over at Disney. And like I said, everybody else who's in the know is like, first time?
Yeah, I mean, you can tell just by watching the content that they put out that this is what's going on, but maybe this is our weapon against gaslighting.
Yeah.
When you tell a normie about these things, they're like, oh, come on, you're just making this up.
Yeah.
But now we have the proof, and they got the James O'Keefe treatment, and they just make it so easy, don't they? Like, it's like the meme, I swear I'm not going to expose my company for breaking the law. Yeah. One glass of wine into my Hinge date. Also, so we actually are breaking the law.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is that not only is Elon Musk kind of signal boosting this stuff when he like quote tweets it, but the fact that like we have a platform like X, formerly known as Twitter, that just allows stuff like this to get out. And you know, this is something that no other news organization would ever like cover. But the fact that it's out there and more people are realizing that if you want like up-to-date, accurate news, like you go to X, you don't go to CNN or Fox News or anything like that. Like stuff like this starts getting like more and more boosted. I think that's one of the big reasons why we're seeing such a huge dip in Biden's poll numbers is because truth is getting out now as opposed to before where it could be like blanket censorship. And what James O'Keefe is doing, while important, when he was doing Project Veritas, like that stuff would get shadow banned and like, you know, and suppressed and stuff like that. And so even though he was doing important work, it wasn't getting the reach it needed to actually be effective. Whereas now anyone who follows Elon Musk, which is pretty much everyone on Twitter, like they're seeing this stuff.
Yeah, I think Elon, it was only like 4 months ago, we did a video about this. Elon posted supposedly like insider information about Disney's hiring practices from a Disney employee, and they have these very complex charts about all of the different quotas that they need to reach. And I knew that America First Legal was going to weigh in on this because they actually launched a lawsuit against Disney back at that point for their discrimination against white straight males and Christians and
also
Jews.
Elon has beef with Bob Iger.
Yeah.
So let's watch the first 2 minutes of this video so you guys can get an idea.
This is Senior Vice President at the Walt Disney Company. His name is Michael Giordano. Giordano,
yep.
Not DiGiorno.
Yes, he's not the he's not a pizza.
And he thinks that he's on an innocent Hinge date, but she just keeps asking more and more questions about his job.
This is the first time that I've seen one. Like it's always the inside joke now is always that it's James O'Keefe himself on the date. And but this is not him.
Surprisingly, this man is straight.
Yes, here we go.
Certainly, there have been times where, you know, there's no way we're hiring a white male person.
Just kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken, but
how would they say it?
There's no way we're hiring a white male person. They say
like straight to you, or okay.
They'd be very careful how they message.
We're gonna get copyrighted by the music that these damn people are listening to in the background.
That's agents.
According to these videotapes, Disney blatantly discriminates against white men in particular.
I think I'm sort of like well prepared for it. I'm well positioned for it. But as far as Disney's concerned, I'm a white male. And that's not who they're looking to promote at the moment.
As a white guy, even Michael has his own doubts about the possibility for advancement for himself at Disney. In fact, Michael actually got to experience Disney's discrimination against white males firsthand.
You know, I've been at the company 11 years now, so I have friends in HR and I have friends in those divisions, and they're like, look, nobody else is going to tell you this, Mike, but they're not considering any white males for the shop. They're just not.
His facial expression.
I would love to know like how that conversation came about. They're just like in the break room and somebody just sidles up next to him. Is like, Mike, I just want to let you know.
Well, he described his job as having to do with closing deals on TV shows.
Yeah.
So he has to do with like the pay rates for these types of people. But I'm sure he knows a lot of the inside baseball as to how they choose the candidates and how they choose cast members. But let's get through the rest of that highlight reel.
Here we go.
They even passed over a qualified half-black person for a promotion because they didn't look black enough.
We wanted to hire somebody in the department a few years ago now who was half black, but didn't like appear half black. And there was a creative executive who was like, we're not like that's not what's wrong. Like they wanted somebody in meetings who would appear a certain way, and he wasn't gonna bring that to the meeting. I mean, it kind of feels like we're, you know, at some point there's going to be a lawsuit. That's kind of how it feels, just because of, you know.
And that is a lawyer talking. So how does Disney explain pushing these discriminatory practices? They use code words and buzzwords.
I'm guessing that there is a acceptable code words and buzzwords that are used to explain what they're looking for. They might say something like, you know, look, we're not looking at like the usual suspects for this job. You know, so it's like not like a legally actionable thing, but everybody knows what it means. They, you know, for writers and actors, you hear all the time, like, you know, looking to hire writers and actors who bring diversity. I'm not looking to bring on any more clients who are white.
Okay.
The Disney tapes.
The Disney
and that's not surprising because they need to use code words and buzzwords to avoid actually getting sued or breaking the law. But we already knew that because the graphic that Elon posted supposedly from a Disney employee says in one of the footnotes, the people who are interviewing candidates for all of these positions are not allowed to ask about your racial makeup, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, and all of these things, but they're allowed to hint at it and just use their observation skills. So you're not just discriminating against white people, you're also discriminating against people who are black but are not black enough. And I just wanted to look at the part of this video talking about financial incentives for diversity because, you know, the conversation about get woke, go broke is incredibly common, but here he is explaining in detail why they can go woke and not go broke simultaneously.
9:20, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go.
I think there are times when it's like so front and center. It's like great because that's the focus, you know. Like we have so many shows where we're casting and we're like, yeah, we're not even going to see, you know, certain people,
you know,
because we need that particular role to,
yeah.
To,
so is it intentional that they want they only look for diverse candidates for certain roles?
Yeah. I think there's certainly a belief that it's just good for society and big goal. But there's also a belief that like we're gonna make more money if we appeal to a wider variety of people, and it's a good thing. We have shareholders too, you know, and so diversity helps with that.
Diversity helps with financial incentive.
Yeah.
So is it like, do you think it's more so on that side, or using like any good prices gets put to use, or
regardless? I think that Disney will do it regardless, but I think that there are like even conservative people who may not want to lean into it can easily make the argument that like we make more money when we appeal to a wider variety of people, and that means diversity.
Yeah.
There's a real focus on every show. And I'm sure the movies too, though I don't deal with that side of it. So, you know, just making sure that the writers' room has a real, you know, diversity, not just gender or sexual orientation and ethnicity, but, you know, making sure that they're hiring some writers who may have certain disabilities where they wouldn't have been hired before. Or, you know, since there's kind of a really broad look whenever we're
yeah.
Thank you. Speaking of financial incentives.
Exactly.
But it's insane because, you know, you don't need to, in the case of Star Wars, right, the vast majority of the people you're trying to appeal to, right, would be men and probably white men. you're not going to appeal to a wider variety of audiences by making all of the protagonists women and POCs.
Well, as
That doesn't actually make sense from a monetary perspective, but they get a bailout because of their shareholders and ESG.
As Chris Gore has said, the most costly thing Disney has ever done is turning Marvel and Star Wars from boy brands into girl brands.
Yeah, because it didn't work.
Yep. Well, and it makes no sense because the whole point of buying Marvel and buying Star Wars and buying Lucasfilm is that you already had your Disney princesses, you already had your animated movies, which, you know, skewed heavily towards women and children. Now you have these brands that would appeal towards men, and theoretically that makes you a powerhouse that can appeal to all demographics. But then they like took it and then changed it. It made no sense.
Well, also, if you buy into this idea that representation matters because only people go to see things that they're represented in, if you don't have any straight white men in your movie or TV show, then straight white men aren't going to watch
What are
it.
they gonna watch?
And that's like the biggest audience demographic out there. So like, even if you buy into like their whole definition of why representation matters, they're literally sabotaging themselves.
And I guess they have to have a deaf screenwriter for Echo.
Yeah.
Like, is that what he meant by filling the writers' rooms with diversity of disability status, which you're also not allowed to ask people about in interviews?
And I think later on in this video, he talks about how most of the head writers, like 30% of the head writers on Disney's projects are all gay.
There's a gay mafia.
Yeah, there's a gay mafia.
And he unknowingly guessed that the population of LGBTQ people in the country is 10 to 15%, which it is not. But he has that perception because he's working around this highly disproportionate amount of gay people. He said that the screenwriters are 30 to 35% gay, and that they need to focus on like trans storylines more so than everybody else. Which is why presumably we're seeing that push.
And what's funny is when you work in like LA and Hollywood, like there is like this bubble there where very rarely do you get like a glimpse of like what's outside that bubble. And I think that the same as in New York, because it's just about like everyone you're hanging out with kind of like has these like beliefs and outlooks. And so when you hear that, oh, middle America doesn't have like these same beliefs, like it's almost like, how can that be? Because everyone I know shares it in, you know.
They must be monsters then. Okay, we got a 20 from Stutter Gentleman. He said, spending 20 at every podcast I find with this news. Someone can study for years to get the skills and you don't get hired, not because you're not black skinned, but because you aren't black enough. Sickening. Yeah, the craziest part, I think, of this video is him sharing an anecdote to his fake Hinge date about this hiring candidate who was half black but did not appear to be so. I guess they call that white passing, and was then passed over for the role for that reason.
Let's watch that clip real quick. We've got that one here.
He sounds so ridiculous, by the way, like trying to weasel his way out of saying explicitly, like he ends all of his sentences like, you know, like, we don't want to hire, like, you know.
I just imagine, like, gentlemen, if you're on this date, if any woman is ever this interested in what you do.
She didn't ask me about my family or my hobbies.
She just really cared about how many people we hired at Disney that looked a certain way. I thought maybe she was a sociologist.
No, but it's so funny. They said that this guy like talked about his dating experience as well with the journalist, and he's like, yeah, like I haven't been on the dating apps before. I really haven't had any relationships that are of note. So he's just glad that he's getting a date.
I just want to know where she's wearing. Is it a button cam?
Like,
is it
this guy could have been saved by just being married at 45.
There you go.
So sad. Okay,
here we go.
Here's the side.
Never understood that. Is it like, cause I know a lot of, like, I have like.
See, like I'm picturing a phone that's like propped up against a milk jug.
I think it must be like hidden in her purse. Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
Black friends like are not as dark as.
She has a lot of black friends. She's not racist.
Do they care about that, or is like the ethnicity actually?
They say they don't care about it, but the truth is, to some extent, they do. If you're mixed, right, you don't look black at all, which sometimes happens.
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, I'm not so sure. But if you're mixed and you can tell somebody's part black, but they're not like that black, so okay, that was still, it's crazy.
But apparently,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's actually, I think that he went on further in that clip. About,
was there
yeah,
more?
I think
Okay.
that he said, I think he
Meghan
said something even
Markle
worse.
is
Oh,
black
yeah.
enough.
They
He
forgot
talked
You
about
can't
Meghan
make
Markle.
this up.
Yeah.
So would like Meghan Markle, who's pretty white,
Right. Yeah.
would she be considered
She would still
like,
be, yeah.
diverse?
She
Or,
would, yeah.
or
Huh? As a white guy, even Michael has his own doubts about
Yeah.
the possibility.
Okay.
So, I mean, he thinks that he's safe working at Disney as a white man.
They'll just
but-
come for him last. You know.
I mean,
well, actually,
do you
no.
think
Now
that
he's being called into the office today, and
I mean, can he lose his job over this?
Oh yeah.
It was funny at the end of the Disney tape part 1, you see the teaser for the next part is James O'Keefe walks in Chris Hansen style, pulls up the
Yeah.
laptop, and he's like, "Is this you?" He like pulls up his LinkedIn profile. He's like, "Is this you, Michael Giordano?" And then he's like, what do I do now?"
oddly enough, what Disney should do is they should write their own like House of Cards style show where like they have their own version of Frank Underwood who then feeds
Yes.
information to a James O'Keefe type
Yeah.
person to take down their competition, right?
Well, there are two things here that I kind of want to touch on. The first is that Chris Gore over at Film Threat has done a great series of investigative articles talking about like the slow decline of Disney and how like the staffing requirements have led to this kind of like internalized racism over time. And whenever you have a situation where people are hired and promoted based off of like race or gender as opposed to actual merit, you get a situation like we're in that right now with Disney, where basically like there's no creative talent at the company. Everything that they make is pretty much like terrible for the most part. With exceptions, but for the most part, the people who are in the positions of power didn't get there by merit. Like there used to be a time where you paid your dues, you worked your way up, and you got into certain positions based off of like your talent, skill, and stuff like that. That no longer exists in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Right. And if you read the Film Threat articles, like it's actually a very interesting detailing about the downfall of Pixar, the downfall of Lucasfilm, like all these like
The loss of the actual creatives that did good work, like John Lasseter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
We had a 20 from Bad Comedy. He said, "I would wager the camera is just on a chick with the heavies. It'd be natural camouflage because you can't just stare looking for a camera."
That's
funny.
So you know what that means when they make a movie about this? Sydney Sweeney ends up playing the lead actress.
Must mean that her left boob is all the way on the other side of the table.
Yes, that's
The
what it
plumber
is.
sent another 20. He said, "Don't internalize racism. It will give you cancer."
I learned that from the show New Amsterdam yesterday.
yeah.
That
Hollywood taught us
there
that.
is nothing that went like we were discussing before, like where actual wokeness exists, because I hate that word. And for the most part, with the movies, perhaps you could say that there's elements of what people would describe that word as in a lot of the crappy non-meritocratic casting that goes on these days, like where they're not bringing in the best actors and stuff like that. And you can talk about DEI and all that stuff. But if you want to know where it's been ruined, where the worst storylines are, it's television. It's network television. That's where, if you will remember, we did the story about the incel who was at the hospital
This is
like a
what
year
boomers
ago.
are watching.
It is, and they're
while
just
they eat dinner.
They don't care because they don't know what's going on, and they're just like,
Incel. Have you ever heard of that,
the
honey?
TV told me that racism gives me cancer. I gotta just not be racist. Yeah. Okay. It's gonna get worse before it gets better, and I don't think it actually gets better for a company like Disney. I don't see. I don't know if too big to fail is necessarily a thing, but it
How
doesn't
much
seem
will it
that-
take for them to actually, have to go under a federal audit for what was just exposed?
I don't know if
Right?
I don't know if there's a federal issue here. Like,
I mean, that presents a legal case for violating the Civil Rights Act.
Possibly. I'm more interested in how this is going to impact the Gina Carano lawsuit.
Yeah.
Because like if there was ever a smoking gun that would help her out, it's this.
Yeah, for sure. And Elon's funding it, so he's aware of it, definitely. I mean, it will be confusing because her lawsuit does mention gender discrimination for her being female. She's saying that her male
Pedro Pascal.
yeah,
is
her male
given
co-stars
special
and colleagues got special treatment, and she has a claim of gender discrimination. But
We'll have to
Yeah.
wait and see. Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.